Victim of serial killer John Wayne Gacy identified after 40 years. The family of a teen who went missing in 1976 are in shock after being told he was a victim of one of America's worst murderers. Police have identified another victim of a notorious serial killer, more than 40 years after he disappeared. James "Jimmy" Byron Hawkinson, who was last heard from in August 1976, was finally confirmed as being murdered by multiple killer John Wayne Gacy after DNA testing. One of America's worst criminals, Gacy was convicted of killing 33 young men before being executed in 1994. 8 of his victims were buried without being identified. A builder from a suburb of Chicago, Illinois, Gacy also worked as an amateur clown and lured young men to his home by pretending to be a police officer or by promising them work. He stabbed one of his victims and strangled the others before burying most in his basement and dumping others in a river. The killings took place between 1972 and 1978, the year Gacy was arrested. Police dug up the 8 unidentified victims in 2011, having asked the relatives of young men who had disappeared between 1970 and 1978 to submit saliva samples. 2 of Hawkinson's siblings submitted samples, with Cook County Sheriff Tom Dart revealing on Wednesday there was a strong genetic association between the samples and remains that have now been identified as the missing teenager. Hawkinson's sister Lori Sisterman told a local CBS radio station, "It's not every day you hear this, a monster murdered your brother. It's just not an everyday, normal conversation that you have with a detective from a different state that tells you this awful news." Hawkinson's body was one of 3 found buried on top of each other, with all 3 believed to have been killed within a short space of time in early August 1976. Hawkinson, from Minnesota, left home in 1976 when he was aged 16 and was last heard from on 5th of August of that year when he called his mother and told her he was in Chicago. He is the second of the unknown victims to have been identified, with 19-year-old William George Bundy identified just months after the 8 bodies were exhumed. Hawkinson's mother attempted to discover if he was one of Gacy's victims by traveling to Chicago in 1979, but died without knowing her son's fate. The call for DNA samples also led to 4 unrelated cold cases being solved, locating 5 missing people who were still alive and 2 who had died elsewhere in the U.S.